The scramble for Africa. The scramble for Africa was a period of intense colonization by European powers. Between the 1870s and the start of World War I in 1914, European nations rapidly expanded their claims in Africa. This period dramatically changed the political and social landscape of the continent. The scramble was fueled by a complex mix of economic, political, and social factors. European powers sought new sources of raw materials and markets for their goods. They also engaged in intense competition for prestige and power on the world stage. The impact on Africa was profound. Traditional ways of life were disrupted, and economies were reshaped to serve European interests. The arbitrary borders drawn during this period continue to have lasting consequences for peace and stability in many parts of Africa. This essay will explore the key events and figures of the scramble for Africa. It will examine the motivations of the main actors involved and analyze the lasting impact of this tumultuous period on the African continent. Early encounters, seeds of change. European contact with Africa had existed for centuries, but the late 19th century saw a dramatic shift. Early interactions were primarily focused on coastal trade. However, the interior of the continent remained largely unexplored by Europeans. This changed with the rise of explorers and missionaries in the 19th century. Individuals like David Livingstone and Henry Morton Stanley ventured into the African interior. The Berlin Conference carving up a continent. The scramble for African territory intensified rivalries between European powers. German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck convened the Berlin Conference in 1884. The conference aimed to regulate European colonization and trade in Africa. No African leaders were invited to this conference. European powers were primarily concerned with their own interests. The Berlin Conference established the principle of effective occupation. This meant a European power could claim a territory if they controlled it. The conference formalized many colonial borders in Africa. It played a pivotal role in shaping Africa's political map today. The scramble begins, stakes and claims. Following the Berlin Conference, the scramble for Africa intensified dramatically. European powers raced to claim territories, driven by economic and political ambitions. This often involved military conquest, as African societies resisted European encroachment. One of the most brutal episodes was King Leopold II's conquest of the Congo. Leopold ruled the Congo, extracting rubber and ivory through forced labor. Millions of Congolese died under Leopold's brutal regime. Colonial powers in Africa. The scramble for Africa involved European powers with different motivations. Great Britain sought raw materials and markets. Its colonies included Egypt, Sudan, and Nigeria. France aimed for a vast West African empire. It controlled Algeria and Madagascar. Germany acquired Namibia, Tanzania, and Cameroon. Portugal secured Angola and Mozambique. Belgium's interest was in the Congo, ruled brutally by King Leopold. Methods of control: how colonization took hold. European powers employed a variety of methods to establish and maintain control over their African colonies. These methods ranged from military conquest to economic exploitation and the imposition of European administrative and social systems. Military force was often used to subdue resistance and assert dominance. European armies, equipped with superior weaponry, faced resistance from various African societies, but ultimately prevailed. Following conquest, colonial powers established administrative systems to govern their new territories. These systems often relied on a combination of European officials and local collaborators, who were co-opted into the colonial structure. Economic exploitation was central to the colonial project. African colonies were seen as sources of raw materials to fuel European industries. Mining operations, plantations, and cash crop production were established, often relying on forced labor or exploitative labor practices. European powers also sought to impose their cultural values and beliefs on African societies. Christian missionaries played a key role in this process, establishing schools and clinics, but also undermining traditional belief systems. Resistance and rebellion: the fight for freedom. While European powers ultimately succeeded in colonizing most of Africa, their control was far from uncontested. African societies and individuals resisted colonial rule from the outset, employing a variety of tactics, from peaceful protests to armed uprisings. One prominent example of resistance was the Ashanti Confederacy in present-day Ghana. The Ashanti fought a series of wars against the British, resisting attempts to subjugate them. Similarly, the Zulu Kingdom, under the leadership of King Cetshwayo, fiercely resisted British expansion in southern Africa. In many cases, resistance took the form of religious movements. These movements often blended traditional beliefs with Christian elements, providing a focal point for opposition to colonial rule. However, African resistance movements faced significant challenges. European powers possessed superior firepower and often employed brutal tactics to crush any opposition. Moreover, the arbitrary borders drawn during the Berlin Conference divided and weakened many African societies, making it difficult to mount a united front. The legacy of colonialism, scars of the past. The scramble for Africa and the subsequent period of colonial rule have left an indelible mark on the continent. The legacy of colonialism continues to shape political, economic, and social realities in Africa today. One of the most significant legacies is the artificiality of African borders. Drawn by European powers with little regard for existing ethnic or cultural boundaries, these borders have created numerous problems. They have led to internal conflicts, separatist movements, and difficulties in fostering national unity. The colonial economic system, designed to extract resources for the benefit of European powers, left many African economies underdeveloped and dependent. The emphasis on cash crop production and the extraction of raw materials hindered the development of diversified economies. Colonialism also had a profound impact on African societies. Traditional power structures were undermined and European languages and cultural values were imposed. This often led to a loss of cultural identity and a sense of alienation among colonized populations. Independence movements, the winds of change. Despite the challenges of colonial rule, the desire for self-determination never waned. Following World War II, a wave of independence movements swept across Africa, challenging the foundations of European colonialism. Several factors contributed to the rise of independence movements. The war had weakened European powers and undermined their moral authority. Moreover, the spread of education and exposure to new ideas fueled nationalist sentiments among African populations. Independence movements took various forms, from peaceful protests and negotiations to armed struggles. Key figures emerged as leaders in the fight for freedom, such as Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, Jomo Kenyatta in Kenya, and Julius Nyerere in Tanzania. The process of decolonization was often complex and fraught with challenges. Some transitions were peaceful, while others were marked by violence and instability. Nevertheless, by the early 1960s, most of Africa had gained independence, marking a new era for the continent. Post-colonial Africa, challenges and triumphs. The end of colonial rule did not magically erase the legacies of the past. Post-colonial Africa has faced numerous challenges, including poverty, conflict, corruption, and the lingering effects of colonialism. Many African countries struggled to build stable and democratic institutions after independence. Military coups, civil wars, and authoritarian regimes became all too common, hindering economic development and social progress. The Cold War also cast a long shadow over the continent. African nations became pawns in the superpower rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, often drawn into proxy conflicts that further destabilized the region. Despite these challenges, Africa has also witnessed significant progress. Many countries have experienced economic growth and development in recent decades. Democracy has taken root in many parts of the continent, with free and fair elections becoming more common. Understanding the past, shaping the future. The scramble for Africa was a pivotal period in the continent's history. It left a complex and enduring legacy, shaping the political, economic, and social landscapes of Africa today. Understanding this period is essential for comprehending the challenges and opportunities facing the continent in the 21st century. The arbitrary borders, the legacy of economic exploitation, and the social and cultural disruptions of colonialism continue to pose obstacles to development and stability. Yet, the resilience and determination of the African people offer hope for a brighter future. By acknowledging the injustices of the past, promoting good governance, and investing in education and economic development, African nations can overcome the challenges of their colonial inheritance and chart a new course for generations to come. The Scramble for Africa serves as a reminder of the importance of understanding history, learning from its mistakes, and striving for a more just and equitable world.